Imagine you're watching a magic trick, right? And it goes just horribly, horribly wrong.
Oh, man, those are the worst.
Yeah, like 1 second, the volunteer is right there on the stage. The spotlight is shining directly on them, and the very next second, they just vanish.
Poof.
Just gone.
Exactly. But when the illusionist lifts the cape up, the trapdoor is completely empty,
Wow.
right? The audience is just totally paralyzed
Yeah.
because there's no puff of smoke. There's no misdirection to explain it. They just, they literally stop existing in that space.
It's terrifying. I mean, it's a situation that completely shatters our basic understanding of cause and effect.
Yeah, totally.
Because when someone disappears, we always expect a starting point, like a broken window or a footprint or at least a motive.
Right, something to go on.
Exactly. But this case we're looking at today fundamentally defies that logic, which is exactly why it has haunted the public for well over a decade now. It really has. So today we are taking a deep dive into the baffling and just deeply tragic disappearance of 3-year-old William Tyrrell. This happened in a quiet Australian town back in 2014.
A case that really gripped the entire country.
It did. Okay, so let's unpack this. I want to ground us in the geography of September 12th, 2014.
That's a good place to start. The geography is everything here.
It really is because the physical space dictates everything that follows. So we are in Kendal, New South Wales. It's this leafy, incredibly quiet area.
Very picturesque.
Yeah. And William is visiting his foster grandmother's house on Benaroon Drive. Now, assuming you know the basics of the case, like the iconic Spider-Man suit he was wearing.
Right. The Spider-Man suit is burned into everyone's memory.
Absolutely. He's playing hide and seek with his sister. He does this playful little tiger roar before he goes around the side of the house. This is all between 10 and 10:25 in the morning.
Broad daylight.
Broad daylight. And we need to look at what happened immediately after that roar because there's just dead silence.
And that geography of Benaroon Drive, it's honestly the ultimate trap for an investigator's mind.
How do you mean?
Well, the house sits on an acre lot, right? But it is situated directly across a bush road from the Kendal State Forest.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, so you have this manicured domestic space pressed right up against dense, rugged, almost impenetrable terrain.
So it's right on the edge of the wilderness, basically.
Exactly. So when the foster mother realizes she hasn't heard him for 5 minutes, her immediate psychological assumption is the forest.
Which makes sense. I mean, the sheer panic of that 30-minute window is just unimaginable.
Pure terror. They search the yard, they knock on neighbors' doors, and by 10:57 a.m., a 000 emergency call is placed.
And the police response is massive. It's instantaneous. They do not wait around.
No, they threw everything at it.
They really did. Helicopters are in the air. They have divers plunging into local dams. The state emergency service is mobilized. Plus, hundreds of local volunteers are linking arms and combing through that dense bushland day and night.
But here is where that magic trick analogy you mentioned earlier really locks into place.
Right, the tracking dogs.
Yeah, the police brought in highly trained detection dogs to track William's scent. And those dogs logged onto him, but the trail didn't lead into the deep woods.
It just stopped.
It simply stopped at the boundary of the backyard. It was literally as if the edge of the grass was the edge of the stage.
That is so eerie.
It is. And that exact moment, the dogs losing the scent at the property line, that became the anchor for the entire decade-long investigation.
Because without any physical evidence of him wandering off into the trees, the police just concluded he didn't walk away.
Right. They made the immediate and monumental assumption that he was taken from that exact spot.
Which fundamentally alters the entire trajectory of a search, right? You stop looking for a lost boy in the bushes and you start looking for a phantom in a car.
Exactly. The lead investigator at the time, Detective Inspector Gary Jubilin, theorized this was a crime of opportunity.
Right, I read about this. He even built a psychological profile around William's clothing.
Yeah, suggesting an abductor might have used the Spider-Man suit to quickly build rapport. You know, like, hey buddy, I love Spider-Man 2, come check out this toy in my car.
Which is a narrative that instantly grips the public because it plays directly into our deepest, most primal fears as a society.
Oh, absolutely. The monster in the bushes waiting to snatch innocence.
But to understand if an opportunistic abduction of a toddler by a stranger actually makes sense, we have to strip away the emotion, right? We have to look at the raw mechanics of crime.
And that is exactly where that BOCR's bulletin is so vital. It acts as a statistical reality check on how abductions truly operate in New South Wales.
Yeah, looking at this BOCR data, I was genuinely struck by how rare actual abductions are compared to what we see on television.
It's a huge disparity.
Massive. The study reviewed 238 abduction victims recorded over a 6-month period, and right off the bat, only 57% of those reports were actual abductions.
Right? A huge chunk, like 32%, were just attempts.
Yeah, and the rest didn't even meet the legal definition.
Exactly. And when you look closely at the mechanics of those actual abductions, the why behind the crime, the motives paint a very specific picture.
What's the breakdown look like?
Well, the dominant motive was sexual desire at 35%. That was followed closely by robbery at 29% and retribution at 24%.
Wow, so robbery and retribution are huge factors.
They are.
Yeah.
Kidnapping a child for ransom or out of some random opportunistic desire accounted for barely a fraction of a percent.
Wait, I'm looking at the breakdown of victim-to-offender relationships here, and I want to really dig into this for a second.
Shit stands out.
Well, the absolute bedrock of the police's working theory, in William's case, was a stranger driving by on a quiet, dead-end street, right?
I know it's the core theory, yeah.
But the data shows that while strangers are the most common single category, they still account for less than half of actual abductions. It's only 43%.
Right. The vast majority of people are actually taken by someone they know.
Yeah, an ex-partner, an acquaintance, a family member holding a grudge, betting the entire investigation on a stranger driving into a dead-end street and snatching a 3-year-old boy without a single scream and leaving zero physical evidence. I mean, it looks less like a viable theory and more like a massive, desperate gamble.
What's fascinating here is that you've hit on the exact cognitive bias that derailed the early investigation.
Really?
Yeah, it wasn't just a gamble. Statistically, it was like betting on a unicorn. When you drill down into the BOCR data specifically for attempted stranger abductions, the demographic profile of the victims absolutely shatters the whole stranger snatching a toddler myth.
Okay, so who is actually being targeted?
87% of the victims of attempted stranger abduction were female, and the average age was 17.
Wait, 17-year-old girls, not 3-year-old boys in Spider-Man suits.
Precisely. The actual abduction of a child under the age of 10 by anyone is incredibly rare.
Wow.
Yeah. In the entire 6-month study period that BOCR analyzed, there were only 7 cases of actual abduction of a child under 10.
Just 7 cases. That's so low.
It is. And if we look specifically at sexual desire as a motive for kids under 15, only 2 out of 5 were taken by a stranger.
So the statistical reality is that offenders target older, more predictable victims, usually in transitional spaces like walking home from a train station.
Exactly. They do not typically drive down unfamiliar, dead-end residential streets in broad daylight, hoping a toddler happens to wander to the edge of the grass.
And yet, because the dogs lost the scent, the police doubled down entirely on this extreme statistical anomaly.
They did. And when the data doesn't support the theory, investigators sometimes just force the narrative to fit.
Yeah, and that friction between the data and the theory, it led to this sprawling, chaotic hunt for ghost suspects.
Because they were convinced a stranger drove away with him, the focus immediately shifted to vehicles.
Right, the cars.
Yeah, the foster mother reported seeing 2 out-of-place cars parked on Benaroon Drive that morning. An older-style gray sedan and a white station wagon.
And they were parked kind of weirdly, right?
Yeah, awkwardly between driveways with the driver's side windows down. In a tight-knit neighborhood, they definitely stood out.
But the police didn't tell the public about those cars on day 1. Or day 10, for that matter.
No, they held that information back for an entire year.
A whole year. The logic supposedly is investigative holdback, right? You keep key details secret so that if someone confesses, you know they're telling the truth.
Right, because only the real killer would know about the gray sedan.
But by the time they released that info to the public, 12 months later, they were asking people to accurately remember a parked car they walked past a year ago. It degraded the memory pool entirely.
Which meant they had no immediate viable suspects from those vehicles. And when police are under that kind of intense national pressure to solve a stranger abduction, they become desperate for anyone who had a legitimate reason to be near that house.
Right, and that desperation landed squarely on a man named Bill Spedding.
It did.
Bill Spedding was a local washing machine repairman who was scheduled to do repairs at the Kendall house around the time William disappeared, and he was just thrust into the center of a media circus.
It was intense.
But they didn't just ask him questions. They tried to systematically dismantle his life to squeeze a confession out of him.
This really highlights the dangerous lengths investigators will go to when they're suffering from tunnel vision. Because they had no physical evidence tying Spedding to William, the police dug into his deep past.
And what did they find?
Well, they ended up charging him with completely unrelated historical child sex offenses from the 1980s in a totally different state, Victoria.
Wow, they went back that far.
Yeah, and they timed these charges just before he was due to appear at a coronial inquest in 2016.
That is a textbook pressure cooker tactic. They knew dragging up 30-year-old charges would ruin his reputation and put him under immense psychological strain.
Hoping he would crack and confess to the William Tyrrell case.
Exactly, but the whole thing collapsed, right? It was definitively proven he wasn't even on Benaroon Drive the morning William vanished.
Yes. The historical charges from the 80s were entirely dropped or dismissed. Spedding actually sued the New South Wales police force.
And this is the kicker: he won. The Supreme Court awarded him over $1.4 million for malicious prosecution.
A massive payout.
Yeah. The judge explicitly found that lead detective Gary Jubilan's pursuit of Spedding was malicious and that the police practically fabricated the timing and severity of those historical charges purely to pressure him.
It is a devastating example of how an unwavering commitment to a flawed theory doesn't just fail to find the missing child, it actively destroys innocent lives in its wake.
Definitely. And Spedding wasn't the only collateral damage, was he?
No, the police also chased a sprawling theory about a local pedophile ring. They heavily investigated a benign group of local senior citizens called grandparents as parents, again, or GMBF.
Wait, a senior citizens group?
Yeah, they spent countless hours trying to prove that convicted sex offenders had somehow used this community group to coordinate a highly sophisticated hit on a toddler.
Which generated an absolute avalanche of false leads. Over 1,000 public sightings poured in.
People were seeing him everywhere.
Yeah, people called Crime Stoppers, swearing they saw William on a flight to New Zealand or sitting in a McDonald's in central Queensland with a woman who looked like his grandmother.
It was chaos.
And here's where it gets really interesting. To try and shake loose a real lead, the government offered a $1 million reward, the largest in the state's history at the time.
$1 million is a lot of incentive.
Right. So I have to wonder, looking at the mechanics of this, did dropping $1 million onto a cold case actually help? Or did it just guarantee that the police would be buried under a smokescreen of white noise?
Well, it's the ultimate double-edged sword of criminal justice. When you offer $1 million, you aren't just soliciting facts. You are actively incentivizing imagination.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
People want to help, but the money creates a frenzy. Someone sees a blonde boy in a red shirt at a grocery store, and their brain, primed by the reward in the media coverage, retroactively alters their memory to match William's face.
Wow, so they genuinely believe they saw him.
Yeah, and then the investigators have to spend thousands of man-hours tracking down well-meaning, completely useless illusions while the actual data gets buried.
And while the public was entirely focused outward hunting for stranger suspects in gray sedans, looking for pedophile rings chasing million-dollar ghosts, a massive foundational secret was actually being kept about the domestic reality of William's life.
This is wild.
It is. A secret that shows just how heavily bureaucratic legal frameworks dictated the flow of information in this case.
This is arguably the most controversial structural element of the entire investigation. Because for the first 3 years of this massive international hunt, the public had absolutely no idea that William Tyrrell was a foster child.
None at all. It wasn't until August 2017, 3 years later, that a Supreme Court ruling finally allowed the public to know his true domestic status.
It took that long.
Yeah, strict child protection legislation in New South Wales legally gagged the media. They were forbidden from naming either the biological parents or the foster parents.
Think about the mechanics of that for a second. When the foster parents did a desperate, emotional interview on national television to plead for his return, the network legally had to shroud them in darkness.
Right, they appeared as anonymous, distorted silhouettes.
Yeah, you have to understand the intention behind those child protection laws, though. They are meticulously designed to shield vulnerable children who are wards of the state from public stigma.
Which makes total sense in a normal situation.
Exactly, to protect them from abusive biological families and to ensure their privacy. But in the context of a missing person investigation, context is the only currency that matters.
Yeah. Daniel Morecambe's father, a man who tragically knows the exact agony of a missing child after his own son was abducted and murdered, he came out and fiercely criticized this gag order.
And understandably so.
He argued completely logically that it severely hindered the vital early weeks of the search. Because how can the public help you find a child if you legally aren't allowed to tell them who the child lives with, what their daily routines are, or who might have a motive to take them?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it exposes a profound, tragic clash between two protective systems.
The welfare system and the justice system.
Right, exactly. The child welfare system fundamentally relies on anonymity and secrecy to keep kids safe. But the criminal justice system, especially in the critical first 48 hours of a missing child case, relies on total transparency and massive public participation.
Yeah, and the well-meaning laws of the welfare state inadvertently created an information vacuum. They effectively forced homicide detectives to fight with one hand tied behind their backs, unable to ask the public the right questions.
And when that legal veil was finally lifted, the sources reveal a deeply complex family dynamic that the public had been totally blind to.
Right. William was born to biological parents with a troubled history, which is precisely why he was placed into state care.
And he was living with a wealthy North Shore foster family.
Yeah, there were documented reports of behavioral challenges with William, but despite that, the foster family was actively discussing formal adoption, and crucially, they were discussing it without the biological parents' knowledge.
That revelation doesn't just add a layer of emotional complexity, it completely rewrites the motive board.
How so?
You suddenly have massive swirling dynamics of custody, state intervention, and family friction localized to the exact environment William was living in right before he vanished. It completely reframes the narrative away from a random stranger on a street corner.
Which brings us to a massive paradigm shift in the investigation. Because as the stranger danger theories exhausted themselves, and as the Spedding lawsuit proved, the police were chasing shadows, and as the context of his foster care finally came to light, well, the investigation turned 180 degrees.
A total pivot.
They stopped looking at the road, and they started looking directly at the soil of the Kendall property.
In November 2021, a new task force, Strike Force Roseanne, launched a highly publicized search of the bushland around Benaroon Drive.
But this wasn't volunteers in high-vis vests looking for a lost toddler anymore.
No, the mechanics of the search had changed entirely. They brought in archaeologists to sift the dirt. They brought in hydrologists to map the flow of underground water.
Because they were no longer looking for a living boy who had been kidnapped. They were explicitly looking for human remains.
And with that physical shift came a seismic legal one. The foster mother, along with the foster grandmother who had since passed away, were officially named by police as persons of interest.
Wow, that is a huge shift.
The investigators began aggressively building a case around a completely new theory, that William hadn't been abducted by a stranger in a car at all, but rather he had suffered a fatal accidental fall from a high balcony on the property that morning.
The police theory alleges that in the immediate, terrifying aftermath of that accident, instead of calling an ambulance, the foster mother panicked. The theory suggests she concealed his death to protect herself or the impending adoption and hid the body before the police arrived.
And by June 2023, the police officially submitted a brief of evidence recommending that the foster mother be charged with perverting the course of justice and interfering with a corpse.
Now, to maintain strict impartiality here, it is absolutely vital to detail the legal reality of those accusations for you.
Yes, we need to be clear about this.
The foster mother fiercely denies any involvement in his disappearance. In a related proceeding, she was actually charged with giving false or misleading information to the New South Wales Crime Commission regarding the timeline of that morning.
But she was found not guilty of that specific charge in November 2022, right?
Correct. The judge ruled the prosecution couldn't prove she knowingly lied. It is also worth noting, as part of the broader legal fallout surrounding the family, that the foster parents were later found guilty in a separate matter of intimidating a different child in their care.
So what does this all mean? We look back at this sprawling, decade-long timeline. We see millions of dollars spent.
Thousands of hours of intense police work.
We see lives absolutely ruined by malicious prosecution like Bill Spedding's.
We see detectives chasing shadows across the globe based on $1 million reward. And the tragic, agonizing irony of it all is that while the entire country was hunting for a phantom pedophile ring, the answer, whether it was a tragic accident or something else, might never have left the boundaries of that Kendall property.
It might never have crossed the edge of the grass.
Exactly.
It really forces us to confront our own deeply ingrained cognitive biases. When we hear about a missing child, the stranger danger narrative is so culturally powerful, so deeply embedded in our psychology, that we completely bypass statistical reality.
The BOCR data was sitting there the whole time.
Right, screaming that a stranger abduction of a child that young from a dead-end street is an extreme anomaly. The data explicitly pointed toward domestic proximity.
But the terrifying image of the Spider-Man suit and the creeping stranger was just too emotionally resonant for investigators and the public to ignore.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I keep returning to a very specific quote from one of the documentary transcripts we reviewed.
Which one?
An exhausted investigator looked at the camera and said, "Someone knows something. William needs justice."
Wow, yeah.
Because the simple laws of physics dictate that bodies do not simply vanish into thin air.
They just don't.
Whether it was a stranger defying every statistical odd in the book, or a tragic accident that was hastily covered up in a moment of sheer panic, someone made a choice that morning, there is an answer waiting to be unearthed.
It leaves you with a really haunting question to mull over long after this deep dive ends. We spent a lot of time breaking down those strict child privacy laws.
The ones that legally gag the media.
Yeah, and kept William's foster status a total secret for the first 3 years of the search. Those laws are meticulously designed by the state to protect vulnerable kids in the foster system from the harsh scrutiny of the world.
But if a child goes missing, and those exact protective laws prevent the public from knowing who they are, where they live, and what their life looks like, when does the ultimate protection become the ultimate barrier to finding them? It's the paradox of the system. You build a wall to keep the monsters out, but you also lock the child in.
Exactly. When the trap door opens and the magic trick goes completely wrong, you don't need a silhouette. You need all the lights turned on to see where they went.